Colin Jones. Thank you for joining us at EcoTrust's Red Building in Southeast Portland, where thousands of people are joining us online, on the radio, and on TV. Live viewers are watching on KGW's website, Facebook feed, and news app. Our radio audience is listening via X-Ray FM stations, 107.1 FM and 91.1 FM. And TV viewers will watch today's program on community media television. We are incredibly grateful for the support of our media partners in bringing City Club forums to our community. In addition to City Club's valued media partners, our sponsors, volunteers, and staff enable us to put on Oregon's best civic programs. A special thank you goes out to today's sponsors, The Standard, Wells Fargo, Eco Northwest, and SEIU Local 49. We'd also like to thank EcoTrust for working with us to bring this special event to this space, and to Molly Boy for providing a wonderful lunch. Please join me in showing our appreciation for everyone. As you hopefully already know, our special guest today is Governor Kate Brown. Oregon's 38th governor has over 25 years of experience in standing up for working families and making government more accountable. As governor, she signed legislation to improve the state's education system, to add jobs by passing Oregon's largest transportation package, to contain costs by improving government efficiency and accountability, and to ensure that 95% of adults and all children have access to health care. Please help me in welcoming Governor Kate Brown.
Thank you, Colin, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be back at the Portland City Club, and I'm certainly looking forward to sharing with you some of my priorities for the legislative session. I also want to say a special welcome to our students from North Clackamas High School. Go Cavaliers. And this room and space are so beautiful. I'm glad you could join us today. Since becoming your governor, I've worked to make Oregon a state where everyone can thrive, to build a better Oregon for all of us. And toward that end, we've made a lot of progress on our statewide goals. In 2017, we passed the largest transportation package since the Johnson era, that would be President Johnson, $400 million per year, focusing on safety, resiliency, and drivability of our roads and bridges, and the first ever statewide investment in public transit. And that's a good thing. We've led the nation in access to the ballot box with our automatic voter registration legislation and paid postage. Yes, and because of that leadership, we are ranked #1 state easiest to vote in and have some of the highest voter turnout. And with your help, we can get to #1, I'm sure. In my tenure as governor, we have invested over $500 million in affordable housing. The goal, of course, is to make sure that every Oregonian has a warm, safe, dry, affordable, and accessible place to call home. Just to give you a perspective, this 4-year investment is more than we've invested in the past 160 years of statehood total. We passed a budget last legislative session that protects health care coverage for 1 million Oregonians, including every single child. And we passed we also passed the most comprehensive reproductive health care bill in the country, ensuring that every woman, no matter her zip code, her income, or her immigration status, can have access to the full complement of reproductive health services. And working closely with the business community, we crafted the most progressive paid family leave policy in the entire country. And as we speak, teachers and administrators are preparing for the largest influx of education funding that Oregon has ever seen, thanks to the Student Success Act. And we ensure that all this new money goes directly into the classrooms through a bipartisan effort to stabilize PERS rates for our schools. We learned, it was actually last week, that our high school graduation rate statewide has risen to 80%. That is the highest in Oregon history. But most importantly, we've seen significant gains in our vulnerable communities, our communities of color, and our tribal communities. This is specifically the result of targeted efforts to improve outcomes for these underserved students. But Oregon's state motto is, she flies with her own wings, not she rests on her laurels. So we're calling this round of conversations the 2020 Legislative Table Set. It's fitting because this year, we're not only setting the table for the legislative session, we're truly setting the table for Oregon's future. We must do something meaningful and soon about climate change. This is the issue of our time. We know that if left unchecked, climate change will have devastating impacts on all that we hold dear. And future generations will rightly judge us not on the fact of climate change, but what we've done to tackle it. The question is not whether we can afford to do something about climate change. It's whether we can afford to do nothing. It's our responsibility, and for those of us privileged to hold public office, literally our jobs, to stand up and be counted. Oregon may be a small state with a modest population and 7 electoral votes, but it is a state with a $12 billion tourism industry and some of the fastest growing cities in the nation, like Portland. We have 363 miles of beloved coastline and 30 million acres of forest, a little under half of the state's total landmass. Our state's heart and soul are in the ocean and those trees, as well as the natural resource industries that surround them, our farmers, our fishers, and our ranchers. We are being impacted by climate change now. With last year's water quality crisis in the Willamette Valley, the diminishing shellfish populations due to ocean acidification, and the voracious wildfires in 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018, and it's only going to get more challenging. After the Senate Republican walkout and the collapse of the cap-and-trade legislation last year, I did a lot of reflecting on how we can move forward. I've met with folks from the timber industry and wood products industry. I toured sawmills, sat down with plant managers and suppliers, and had face-to-face conversations with Timber Unity. I met with the Farm Bureau, business leaders, and activists from all sides of this debate. I not only listened to them, I heard them. I've taken all of these conversations to heart, and we've made a number of serious policy changes to address many of their concerns. I am committed to crafting climate policy that protects our environment and also grows our economy. In Oregon, we can do both. But before I get into the nitty-gritty details of these solutions, I want to take a moment to reflect on the why. Because before we can discover what we have to gain, we should all be on the same page about what we have to lose. After the 28 wildfire season, I established the Oregon Wildfire Council. We are currently fighting fires with last century's tools. The council's job is to modernize prevention, mitigation, and suppression of wildfires as our climate continues to change. We're in the middle of a perfect storm, decades of federal land mismanagement combined with changing climate. Our mission is to keep Oregonians safe and our landscapes healthy. But we can't do that if we're running plays from last century's playbook. For resilient landscapes, the state must actively manage roughly 5.6 million acres of state forests and rangelands. We can do this through the thinning of trees, more frequent prescribed burns, and the removal of fuels for wildfire. There's absolutely no question that this is a major investment. The Wildfire Council estimates it will cost around $200 million annually over the next 20 years for prevention, mitigation, and suppression. Doing nothing is not an option. If we don't act now, the cost will be 11 times greater, not to mention the potential loss of homes, land, and life. And by investing in restoration treatments and forest health, Oregon may avoid costly damages while simultaneously creating jobs in rural parts of the state. Jobs like Forester Jana Peterson in Eastern Oregon, who works with local landowners to thin overgrown tree stands. She knows the science, she knows the land, and through her work thinning trees, she's making our forests healthier and more fire resilient, 1 acre at a time. Another great example is the work being done in Central Oregon with the Deschutes Collaborative Forest Project. The collaborative includes experts from every corner of industry and interest: timber, tourism, and conservation. These environmentalists, loggers, private landowners, and tribal members understand that their beloved forests are at risk unless they act now, and that they have learned that this is work we must do together, which is why I'm asking your Oregon legislature to invest $200 million this session in wildfire prevention, mitigation, and suppression efforts. It's imperative that we preserve the beauty and bounty of Oregon. Our thriving economy is in part dependent on our bountiful natural resources, our fisheries, our timber, our wine grapes, and wheat. When I drive through farm country, I love seeing signs everywhere for Century Farms, farms that have been family held for 100 years. Oregon currently has over 1,200 family farms and 41 sesquicentennial farms. That's 150 years of family farming. To become a Century Farm, families have made and continue to make sacrifices so that their farms can stand the test of time. They are feeding our families. They are providing timber for our homes. They grow plants and seeds that make up yards, plots, and properties throughout the state and all over the world. These are billion-dollar industries that started with one family, one plot of land, and the persistence to make it happen. Our farmers are innovating every single day in the face of changing climate. Grass seed farmers are exploring no-till farming practices that lower fuel costs and retain moisture in the soil. Gingrich Farms in Clackamas County hires falconers to control pests instead of using harmful pesticides. And every day, more Oregon farmers are deciding to become vertically integrated, taking out the go-between supply, what they need to do business. These families are thinking ahead, hoping that they will have something to hand down to their children and their grandchildren. And now we find ourselves in the very same position. Take, for example, Ben Doomling. Ben's family has been operating Xena Forest products in the heart of the Willamette Valley for 3 generations. As a rural business owner, he realizes that climate legislation may cause him to tighten his belt in the short term. As Ben says, there's no magical free solution to this problem, but the cost of inaction will hurt my bottom line much more. The world's economies are rapidly transitioning away from fossil fuels. We need to continue to be a leader in this effort. There are so many incredible things about Portland that make it a great place to call home. At the same time, you're watching your community change very rapidly. We're seeing this around Oregon and around the entire country. Portland experiences what many are calling a mid-decade boom, and there have been an influx of young folks, businesses, and families to the city and outlying neighborhoods. The housing, tourism, and hospitality industries can't grow fast enough to keep up. Portland used to be one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, but growth is slowing. And now we must take a long look at the city's quality of life. We know that the cost of living continues to rise in this city, and that many folks here are struggling to make ends meet with housing insecurity, with healthcare costs, with student debt. And as the city is to put to use computers, working people, and tourists alike, we have to invest in the resiliency of our infrastructure, especially in the face of a potential Cascadia seismic event. That means our roads, bridges, buildings, and of course, the critical energy infrastructure hub here in Northwest Portland. Because we want to keep Portland the weird, close-knit city where people have chickens in their backyards, my husband hasn't agreed to any yet, and make their own pickles. But to do that, the city must continue to be livable. And while Portland is the metropolitan trade and tourism epicenter of Oregon, the state as a whole is still very much a natural resource-dependent economy. And to echo Bend, these are the issues, the industries that will see impacts of climate change first, in their crop yields and in their bottom lines. In the same way that they are on the front lines of the impacts of climate change, they are also on the front lines of being able to combat it. And that's why it is so important to have an economy-wide solution. The spike of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere has been building worldwide since industrialization, and it is caused by humans. The impacts of climate change are even more devastating to our most vulnerable communities. Communities of color, low-income communities, and our rural communities already have higher rates of chronic diseases like asthma and heart disease. Climate change increases these existing health disparities. For example, in 2018, we saw a 20% increase in the number of asthma and other respiratory-related emergency room visits during the peak of wildfire season. Reducing emissions will play an important role in the worldwide effort to slow the gradual warming of the planet, which will reduce the risk of wildfire and thus in turn reduce smoke risk. Unfortunately, as everyone in this room knows, we're not going to get any help from our federal government. This administration has already rolled back some 85 environmental regulations. They are currently gutting the Clean Water Act, as well as many other laws signed into law by President Richard Nixon. The good news is that our nation's founders gave states the ability to control our own destinies, and that's exactly what we're going to do here in Oregon. It is my hope and my expectation that the legislature will move forward with legislation in the 2020 legislative session that will do a couple of things. Number one, set a science-based economy-wide cap to reduce carbon emissions. Number two, the cap will have an enforcement mechanism that will keep us on track to meet our emissions goals. And it will do so in a way that makes significant investments in and does not exacerbate existing economic disparities in our rural communities, our communities of color, and our tribal communities. After taking time to speak to stakeholders and communities all over the state, I've taken stock of our situation, and here's what we know. The transportation sector is the biggest contributor to our statewide emissions, more than both industrial and agricultural sectors combined. We know that the lion's share of transportation emissions occur in more densely populated areas, which is why, after careful thought, we have come up with a geographic phase-in that will start in Portland in 2022 and then in 2025 expand to other populated areas. The legislature is still finalizing details. It's still a WIP, work in progress. But under this plan, or a similar version, the majority of truly rural communities will be exempted from price increases at the pump. This may sound familiar because that's how we crafted our minimum wage increase, to reflect the different economic regions of Oregon. The amendments also mitigate the effects of price increases on rural manufacturers like food processors, sawmills, as well as pulp and paper mills. Last week, representatives of the food processing industry, which opposed the bill last year, changed position and came out in support of this new proposal, specifically citing the focus on energy efficiency as a better way to do business. Craig Smith of Food Northwest said, "Focusing on reducing carbon through efficiency rather than rate increases allows us as a business to not only reduce our carbon footprints and to do so without the crippling effect of rate increases." We listened, we heard, and now it's time to get it done. We know that capping and pricing carbon pollution provides a way for Oregon to meet our climate goals, grow our economy, and create new, good-paying jobs all over Oregon that can't be outsourced. And the proposal enables us to make investments to help all Oregonians transition to cleaner energy. It's critical that we get this done and do so in a way that doesn't exacerbate existing disparities, but invests in addressing them. One last story I will leave you with. Many of you remember the 2018 Klondike fire that burned over 175 acres of the Rogue Siskiyou Forest in southern Oregon, devastating for the forest, wildlife, and of course, our families in the area. Just days before harvest, a large out-of-state winery rejected 2,000 tons of fruit, $4 million worth of wine grapes left on the vine because the company worried the grapes were tainted by smoke. But Oregonians stepped up. Lab analysis revealed that most of the crop was not damaged. So Willamette Valley Vineyards, King Estate Winery, Sylvan Ridge Winery, and Irie teamed up to help out. 1 week later, an extraordinary plan was set into motion. The winemakers bought as many of the grapes as they could, prioritizing smaller farms and vineyards that lack crop insurance. They were able to save about a quarter of the season's crop, far from the entire crop, but enough to make a difference. The 4 wineries worked as one to make 3 new wines under the label Oregon Solidarity. I've had some. It's delicious. The proceeds from the wine have been donated to Rogue Valley Vintners to help support vineyards in the region. I share this story to make a larger point, that despite an amazing industry-wide effort, they were still only able to save a quarter of the crop. What happens in 2020 if we have another devastating wildfire season? The story also reminds me that Oregonians are capable of seeing the forest through the trees, of thinking of their future rather than wallowing in the present. We take care of each other, even when it's not the most convenient to do so. And now, as we have done in the past, we must take the time to invest in our future. It matters not just to our children, but to our grandchildren and ourselves as well. Because we want a thriving economy 10 years, 20 years, and 100 years from now. I want all of our century farms to become bicentennial farms. I heard a really talented Salem High School junior speak this summer. Her name is Eddie Binford Ross, and she spoke on the steps of the Capitol building. She's here with us today. She played hooky from school. Eddie, would you please stand up? Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you. On the steps of the Capitol last summer, Eddie said, "We live in this hyperpolarized world where everything is left or right, red or blue. But right now, we do not have time to waste. It's time for us to act. Damn, we're raising some really smart kids in this state. And she couldn't be more right. Together, we must act. Thank you all so very much. Let's get this done.
Thank you very much. For our radio audience, this is City Club of Portland's Friday Forum, coming to you from the EcoTrust building in Southeast Portland. And I am Colin Jones, former president of City Club. With us today is Governor Kate Brown, discussing her priorities for the upcoming session and her vision to keep Oregon moving forward. We'd like to welcome, we're going to move to the Q&A section of our program today. And we'd like to start by welcoming our civic scholars from North Clackamas High School to ask the first questions. Afterwards, the floor will be open to further questions. The microphone is here. If you are not a student from North Clackamas High School, if you could take a step back and make sure there is enough room for them to get in there. I will also say, everyone watching or listening today is welcome to ask a question. If you've written a question on an index card, now is a good time to hold it high for City Club staff to collect. You may also submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag FridayForum. To those of you asking a question at the mic, please identify yourself and ask one question in 30 seconds or less. I'm noticing a very long line for questions, so I would say that given the number of people interested, I will nudge you firmly but lovingly toward a question mark if it seems like you're veering closer to monologue than dialogue. So, with that in mind, thank you. Do we have a student from North Clackamas that is interested in asking a question? Now's the time. Be decisive. Both of you can go. That's great. Let's give them a round of applause. Yeah. Walk quickly.
While she's coming up, I'll just say I was delighted to have the opportunity to speak with our North Clackamas students that are here today. Their high school has one of the highest graduation rates in the state, and we're really proud of the work they're doing to make sure that all of our students are graduating with a plan for their future. So keep up the great work at North Clackamas and across the state.
Thank you. If you could start by sharing your name and then offering up the question.
My name is Grace Lovell. I go to Clackamas. I'm a sophomore. And we don't have any questions, but we just wanted to say thank you for allowing us to speak with you and everything that you've done for supporting our high school.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you. Please.
Chris Smith, City Club member. Governor, you said yourself transportation is the largest sector of greenhouse gases in the state. Last year, during the comment period for the Rose Quarter Freeway expansion, more than 2,000 comments were received. 90% of them opposed the project or asked for a full environmental impact statement. Yet the Oregon Transportation Commission appears poised to move forward without an EIS. Two questions. One, do you expect the commissions you appoint to listen to public comments? And two, will you ask the commission
We
to
did
do
ask
an
for
EIS?
just one question at a time.
Okay.
You
One
might
question,
remember
then,
that
will you
from about...
ask for an EIS?
There we go. Thank
Thank you. Appreciate the question about the situation at the Rose Quarter. So as I mentioned in my remarks, transportation is 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions statewide, and the best strategy to reduce carbon in transportation is an economy-wide, market-based approach with enforceable limits, and obviously that's the proposal that's on the table for the legislative session. We absolutely must address the Rose Quarter issue to increase safety, and at the same time, we can do this with a layer of congestion pricing. It should reduce carbon emissions overall. In terms of your question, do I expect my members of my boards and commissions to listen to public comments? Absolutely. We have 300 boards and commissions, and I expect my commissioners to listen and respond to the public comments. And I believe that the Oregon Transportation Commission is doing that.
Thank you. Take another question.
We have a tremendous homeless crisis in our region, and they are folks who are part of our community. They are our neighbors, they are our friends, they are our brothers, sisters, children, parents. We have a crisis that absolutely needs every bit of attention that we can give it to really resolve the health of our entire region. I stand ready as your Metro Counselor. My name is Sam Chase, I'm Metro Counselor, and I stand ready as a Metro Counselor to join here together to collect signatures at the ballot, to refer an initiative directly to the voters using our Metro authority, whatever it takes to bring services to the folks who are being left behind right now on our streets. How can we push and maximize the state in really bringing those services, those case management services, substance use disorder treatment, mental health support? How can we do more at the state to bring those critical services as quickly as possible?
Thank you, Sam, for the question. And my heart goes out to the children on our streets. According to our Department of Education, we have over 22,000 kids across the state that are either houseless or housing insecure. Our veterans, 1,500, and thousands of families. It's absolutely unacceptable. Every Oregonian deserves a warm, safe, dry, affordable, and accessible place to call home. That's why I've fought for us to invest at the state level over $500 million in affordable housing, rental assistance, and homelessness prevention in the last 4 years. As I said, this is more than we've spent in the entire history of the state of Oregon. We do not have a federal partner right now in this work. And that's why it's so important that we double down on our efforts, and that's exactly what we're doing at the state level. I think it's key that we partner with our local jurisdictions, including Metro, Multnomah County. Chair Kafori's here. We're doing great work, as well as the city of Portland. We're gonna have to be creative and innovative. We're gonna have to look at state policies. We've passed both Senate Bill 608, which capped rent increases and work to keep families in their rental homes. We passed House Bill 2001 to include higher density housing in our communities and our neighborhoods. There's still more work to be done. This is work that we need to do together, and I'm supporting every effort to make this happen.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Governor. My name is Chris May, and my question is about climate change. Last year, you postponed providing protections to a scenic river slated to be clear-cut in order to rally support in the Senate from legislators who receive large contributions from the timber industry. My question is, when sponsors of Jordan Cove's liquefied natural gas pipeline resubmit permit applications to move forward on what would be the state's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, what assurances do Oregonians have that financial and political considerations won't trump your stated commitment to addressing climate change? Thank you.
Appreciate the question. I made a commitment when I was running for governor that I was going to ensure Oregonians on all sides of this issue that there would be a fair process, that they would have an opportunity to have their voices be heard, and that Oregon regulations and statutes would be enforced. Any project that impacts Oregonians and public lands across the state must be in full compliance with Oregon environmental statutes. That's a commitment I made to Oregonians, and that is a commitment I will keep.
Thank you.
Take a question from the cards. So Oregonians are getting older, and older adults are a vital part of our communities. What legislation should be proposed to address the needs of elders in health, jobs, and accommodations?
So I think one of the challenges is making sure that we have healthy communities for all populations, and particularly our aging senior population, of which I hope to be a member of sometime soon. The challenge, I think, is right now around housing affordability and the significant work that we have done to invest in affordable housing. As I am traveling around the state and communities across the region, what is really clear is that we need to make sure that when we are building affordable units, that they are accessible. And that is a huge issue, and that's what I'm going to be focused on. I think the work that is happening here in the Portland region to make sure that our communities are walkable, not necessarily scooterable, but pedestrian and bike friendly are absolutely key. I think that is a critical piece and part of the work that we did in investing in the 2017 transportation package to ensure better pedestrian friendly walkways. And then I think the third piece, and I think a huge issue for many seniors, is access to health care, and particularly prescription drugs. We passed legislation last session. It is currently held up in the courts. I anticipate that we will continue this conversation, but all of our seniors, all of our Oregonians deserve access to life-saving, health-saving medications in this state.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anthony Petchel, City Club member with Reach Community Development, affordable housing nonprofit. Thank you for your support in that space. We know that the number one driver for the need for affordable housing is income inequality. And I was wondering, in your climate policies and proposals, how you can help ensure and monitor that these new jobs and new economic opportunities are equitably accessible to communities who have historically been barred from those industries.
So the underlying frame of this legislation is to make sure that we are investing in our underserved communities. And by that, I mean our rural communities, our communities of color, and our low-income communities. A specific example of that in the proposal is the work to set aside 10% of the proceeds to invest in our tribal communities. But all of the investments will have what I would say a restorative justice as a frame. And I'm honestly really proud about the legislators who are working on this and my team who is working on it with that focus in mind, because I think that will help us move Oregon forward as we tackle climate change. We know that the most devastating impacts will be on these underserved communities. And that's why it's imperative that everything we do moving forward, we make sure that it doesn't exacerbate the disparities and instead makes investments in addressing them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Governor, for being here today. With the passage of the Student Success Act, for which education advocates, I think, generally just feel a huge relief, at least we can start to catch up. What do you see as a governor that you want to see, that you will be expecting in the classroom for each child in January, say 2021, that will make a difference with this act? What will you expect to see?
Wow, okay, I could be here for about 4 hours on answering that particular question. I think for me, this was something that we've been working on for years, if not decades. I ran for office in 1992, and my platform, that was my first run for office, I ran as a young House member on a platform of stable and adequate funding for our education system. 92 was just after the passage of Ballot Measure 5. Senator Shirley Gold had been working in my community for years to make more investments in education, had not been successful. I ran on that issue. In 2018, my education platform was stable and adequate funding for our education system. So I was so delighted that we were able to move forward on the Student Success Act, which is a significant investment in creating what I call a seamless system of education from cradle to career. We want to make sure that we improve outcomes for all of our students, and we are actually doing that. As I mentioned earlier, our high school graduation rate is now at 80%, highest ever in Oregon history. Still more work to be done, but the work that's happening on the ground with our teachers and administrators in school across the state is phenomenal. I'm most excited about the work at the high school level around career and technical education, or STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. We know that when students have access to hands-on learning, that they want to stay in school. It connects classroom to career, and it awakens them to the power of their own potential. and we know they graduate. And this is particularly true in our underserved communities. So moving forward in that arena, I want to make sure that we're connecting the dots between high schools, community colleges, universities, and our businesses across the state, across the region. I want to make sure that we are doing the work in our high schools that get students ready for success, whether it's a career and technical ed program, community college program, and that these students can transfer seamlessly. I think that's critically important, and when they're done, that they have the tools to compete in a global economy. But we also have to make sure that we are developing a system of early childhood care and education. For the first time in a very long time, we have made a significant investment with the Student Success Act in early childhood education. We know that this is a way to close the opportunity gap before it has a chance to take root. And so by investing $400 million in ensuring more of our low-income families have access to pre-K, by providing services for our EIS students, by providing our families with the support and services they need, we know a couple of things: that more kids will show up to kindergarten ready to learn, and our families and our parents will have the support and services they need to thrive. And so that's where I'm going to be focused. It has to be a seamless system. We have to see better outcomes, and I know we can make it happen because this is Oregon, and we're making a significant investment in a paradigm shift here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure. I have a card question. I just wanted to clarify. You referenced more supports for EIS students. What does EIS stand for?
Early intervention services. Thank you. This was really important. We have done a better job identifying children that need early intervention services, but we have not funded the services that they need. So with the investments that we have made in the Student Success Act, and particularly around early intervention services, we can ensure that our children have the services that they need and our families have the supports they need.
Thank you. So the question on the card is about the Cascadia subduction zone fundamentally. What steps are you taking to build out the Shake Alert seismic warning system and to bring the CEI under state regulation?
Oh my gosh, who planted this question? It's perfect. I didn't have time in my remarks to talk about the work we're doing about seismic resiliency, but we don't know when the big one is coming. We don't know if it's going to be next week or next decade or, frankly, 50 years from now. But on January 26th, 1700, we had a Cascadia event here on the Pacific Northwest coast. It was a few years before I was born. It was devastating to the region. We have to be prepared for that. And for me, that looks like a $12.7 million investment and a few key priorities. Number one, Shake Alert. What is Shake Alert? It's a notice. And believe me, under these circumstances, every single second will save lives. We are the only state in the region without this program, and so I'm asking your legislature to make it happen in February. Secondly, we need to invest in preparing our most vulnerable families for an earthquake or a natural disaster. And the benefit about being prepared for a Cascadia event is you're also prepared for other natural disasters. So 200,000 families with 2 weeks worth of supplies. How many people in this room are 2 week ready? Can I see hands? Oh, pretty good, pretty good. What does that mean? 1 gallon of water per person for 2 weeks, and your favorite non-perishable for 2 weeks. That could be like peanut butter, or for those of you in the spam crowd, Spam. But you gotta have your kit ready. It also looks like making sure that we are investing in that state agencies are working very closely with the utilities and Energy Hub in Northwest Portland. We need more tools. I'm going to be asking the legislature for more tools, both regulatory authority and enforcement authority. We have an Energy Hub up here on the river. If we have a 9.0, that Energy Hub, in short order, would be toast, and we can't let that happen. It would be extremely damaging to our environment, extremely damaging to our, frankly, our population, and obviously very difficult for us to be able to access energy for weeks or possibly months. And the fourth piece is investing in dam infrastructure. Water everywhere. We have to make sure our dams are resilient to earthquakes.
For those that didn't have our vantage point, about maybe a third of the room, 40% of the room, raised their hand as having 2 weeks, which, so if shared among all of us, is about 4 days. We'll take the next question.
I'll give everything up but my chocolate.
Ted Kay, City Club member. Oregon is an exceptional state, but the benefits of that exceptionalism do not extend to our tax system, which by all measures is unfair, inconsistent, and unnecessarily volatile. What will it take to reform our tax system? And by reform, I don't mean code for raising taxes. I mean rationalizing the system of income, property, and sales tax.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. I assumed we would get to the sales tax conversation when we had 50% of Oregonians were immigrants to the state and overtook the native Oregonians. That happened about a decade ago, and the numbers on the sales tax conversation have not changed a whole lot. In fact, I think it's a really challenging conversation for Oregonians. But I think what we tried to do, and our goal is in setting tax policy, is to make sure that we have one of the more progressive tax policies in the country. I think we do. It is unfortunate that we are primarily dependent upon the income tax, but that is the way of it. And we've worked really hard to make sure that we are doing it in a way that ensures that the wealthier end of the spectrum pays more than or pays their fair share as opposed to the lower end of the spectrum. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you. Happy to have the tax reform conversation, but I will tell you that the Student Success Act was an extraordinary lift. It hasn't happened. This is an effort that we've been working on for years, for decades, and the fact that we were able to do this in 2019 is really extraordinary. And I just want to say thank you to the legislators, to the teachers, to the public union advocates that helped make it happen because folks, we've been working on this for almost a lifetime. I was really proud of that work. Thank you.
So a follow-up on that, when we've talked to other elected leaders around the state here at City Club, one of the things that has come up is that much of our tax code is bewilderingly built into our Constitution. And so do you think that the state would benefit from a constitutional convention to really sort of look at the whole thing rather than trying to take it item by item by item, or is that going too far?
So I'll just say this about the Constitution. Because of our initiative process, we've put a lot of stuff in the Constitution, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't. And it's made the Constitution a little unwieldy. To give you an example of one of the measures that I thought was really problematic was our kicker law that is now in the Constitution. We had a $1.7 billion kicker this year that went out to Oregonians. The vast bulk of it went to wealthy Oregonians. And I had worked to see if I could get support in your legislature to use those very valuable dollars to invest in our unfunded actuarial liability for PERS and affordable housing. We couldn't make that happen, but I thought it was a really incredible lost opportunity. I'd love to have more conversations about the Constitutional Convention, but I think that's a really tough sell.
Sure.
Good afternoon, Governor Brown and fellow City Club members. My name is Ruby Houghton-Pitts, and I'm the State Director for AARP here in Oregon. I want to thank you, Governor Brown, for being at our Age Friendly Summit, which was a statewide summit held back in December. And I want to also thank you for every comment that you've made here today, because they all fit under the age-friendly umbrella, including climate change. I want to remind you of the top three: outdoor spaces, transportation, and housing. And I want to ask you this one question: when are we going to push forward our age-friendly, livable initiative in this entire state? I think it will help you, and it will help all of us, ages 0 to 100. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruby. We'd love to get your help as we develop our 21-23 budget, and we're in development after the February session and look forward to having you at the table and participating in that conversation. Let's make it happen. Thank you.
So we'll do another question from the cards. This one says, today the Supreme Court has allowed the president to move forward on enforcing the public charge rule on immigrants. What is the state's response to protecting Oregon's immigrants and their access to both citizenship and public services?
So my lesson in this issue came from Senator Avell Gordley, and we were fighting for farm worker rights, working together in the 1990s. And she said to me, no human being is illegal. And I have taken that message and really used it to frame our work. I've really used that to frame our work to make sure that Oregon is a welcoming and inclusive state to all who call Oregon home. Number one, as many of you know, signed an executive order when Trump was talking about the Muslim ban. We were the first state in the country to get that executive order out in a very comprehensive way. Number one, in a way to ensure that Oregon will never have any type of Muslim ban. And number two, the executive order continued our sanctuary, our state sanctuary status to our state employees to ensure that they are not treating our immigrants as illegals. Third, I am continuing to fight back every tool that I have with letter writing, with email writing to the Trump administration, and frankly, when appropriate, tweeting to say that this is not who we are as a people. We are a country of immigrants beyond the indigenous population, and that we need to be welcoming, that it is immigrants that make our communities rich, help grow our economy, and frankly, strengthen the fabric of our communities. And as long as I am alive, I'm going to keep to fight Oregon as welcoming and as inclusive as possible.
Good afternoon, Governor Denny Doyle from Beaverton. I was going to ask you simply who's going to win the Super Bowl, but we'll skip that.
Oh, good. I'm watching college basketball right now. There's a couple of really great teams you may have heard of. Our women Ducks and our women Beavers are kicking butt everywhere on the court.
There you go. Last week I was in D.C. With the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting, and 300 mayors were there. And Friday morning we had a session with the 8 mayors from the cities that had mass shootings. It was quite a moving deal, and on behalf of U.S. Conference of Mayors, we're all going to try to talk to our state legislature to see what things we can put in place, maybe at the next session, to help us stop this violence. You should watch the video of that. And that's why I just wonder if there's any chance we can take up this issue at the next long session and try to arrive at some solutions.
Firearm violence?
Pardon me? Firearms, yeah.
Yes,
The mass shootings, yeah.
Right, okay, thank you.
Sorry.
I just wanted to make sure I was on connected. So every Oregonian has the right to be free from gun violence. And under my tenure, we have made steady progress from creating a comprehensive database, number 2, passing our red flag laws, to number 3, closing our loopholes. For me, this became personal after the October 2015, it was October 1st, 2015 shooting at Umpqua Community College, where we lost 9 students and a professor. And I went down to the community and saw the pain and saw their struggles. So I am absolutely committed to this movement. I appreciate the work that Moms Demand Action is doing, that our legislators are doing. I am hoping we can move forward in February, but if not, we're gonna fight like hell to make sure that we move forward in 2021.
I'll share that with the meeting. I appreciate that, as does a lot of mayors from around the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Doyle. Let's give him a round of applause. Serving the city of Beaverton.
One of the questions that we got ahead of time that really connects to that is that sort of the legislation to combat gun violence as well as to combat vaccine or measles outbreaks. Those were the pieces that were traded away to get Republicans to come back from the first walkout. And so what strategy do you have, or do you hope that the legislature will employ to manage sort of a potential walkout, or what that could look like this coming session?
Well, both of those issues that you mentioned, we've been talking about. Firearm safety and vaccinations are public health issues, and I am committed, my administration is committed to moving forward with both of them. In terms of the particular strategy around the walkout, here's what I would say. For folks that don't like for legislators who don't like a particular bill, I encourage you to show up, try and make it better, and if you don't like it, vote no. But shutting down state government is certainly not the answer to that particular question. So.
Thank you.
Win Wakala, City Club member. I was very excited on Saturday. I went and saw the old Wapato jail, and I'm very excited about what they're trying to do. I fight human trafficking, sex trafficking of young girls, so I don't like them out on the streets. And my brother lived under a picnic table at one time. He was homeless, so I understand this. But having the wraparound services there, I mean, people who are homeless don't even know what day of the week it is. They can't show up at an appointment somewhere, so it's really important.
What's your question, Wynn?
Can you help get the city, the counties, the state together to help fund this program?
So we have been working very closely, the city, the county, and I, and my folks at the state level, to invest what we are calling permanent supportive housing. And this is a best practice nationally. And permanent supportive housing is when you co-locate the services that are needed, whether it's substance use treatment, educational services, job finding services, all in the same building that the affordable housing is located in. As you mentioned, Wynn, and I feel so badly for your brother who struggled, having it co-located is a game changer for these folks, right? These are our family members. These may be our nieces or nephews. It may be an aunt or an uncle. These are our neighbors. These are our friends. They deserve housing, affordable, accessible housing that will provide a warm, safe, dry roof over their heads. And that's why we invested $50 million in permanent supportive housing. And my director, Margaret Salazar at OHCS, is working to leverage as many resources as possible to make sure that we can build as many of these units possible to get our most vulnerable folks without housing off the streets. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one last question, so we'll do one that we got dozens of on Twitter, which is to kind of bring us back to the beginning and your comments about climate change. And so I think for a lot of folks, you talked about the transportation bill, which included significant investments in public transit, which is what you tend to talk about. It also included a couple $100 million for fossil fuel infrastructure in the form of the Rose Quarter Freeway expansion. And a lot of folks see sort of the Columbia River Crossing 2.0 project coming to life again. And so how do you kind of reconcile these big investments in fossil fuel infrastructure with sort of a climate justice vision?
So, as I mentioned, transportation is 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. We need to make sure that we reduce carbon in transportation through an economy-wide, market-based approach. And I think we can do both, honestly. The investments that I mentioned in the Rose Quarter safety, we can do this in a way with a layer of some type of congestion pricing, will provide safety as well as carbon emission reductions. Obviously, when people are idling on I-5 at that particular pinch point, you've got a lot of congestion, a lot of emissions happening there. And in terms of the Columbia River Crossing, or the project formerly known as the Columbia River Crossing, now known as the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project. Our goal there is seismic resiliency, and in another, you've got another pinch point for congestion. So our investment in the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project will only be done if there is public transit, mass public transit as part of that particular project. Governor Inslee is committed to that, and so am I.
Thank you very much. Our time is up today, and we encourage you to continue this conversation in your community and online. Follow City Club at PDX City Club on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And we are so grateful to everyone who made today's forum possible, but thank you most of all to Governor Kate Brown for joining us.
Thank you very much, Colin. Thank you, Portland City Club!